I was reading an article about retirement planning, the kind that talks about the 4% rule, the 60-40 portfolio, quitting at 65 and coasting, and I kept reading it thinking, I don't do any of this, not one thing on the list. Am I doing retirement wrong? I looked at what I do and how I manage my money and how I structure my days and how I think about work and income and spending. It's not doing it wrong, it's doing it differently, on purpose. And the rules I'd been reading, the ones we've all been handed about how retirement is supposed to work, those were written for a different version of life that a lot of us have never actually lived. Hi, I'm Michelle, and on this channel we talk about creating a peaceful, confident life after 50, especially if you're living alone, traveling solo, or navigating retirement. And today's video is a direct follow-up to my Retire ASAP video. If you haven't watched that one, I'll link it here and at the end, because that video was about when to retire. And this one is about how to think about the money and the life once you get there. A lot of the foundation rules of retirement planning were built during a specific era. Lower divorce rates, two-income households where one income was the primary, women largely out of the financial conversation, expected to raise children and trust that someone else was handling the money. Social security and pension structures designed around a male breadwinner model. That world has changed. A lot of us are on our own now, either by choice or divorce, widowhood, or simply because we've built independent lives and we like them that way. And when you're living alone and when there's no second income, no partner's social security check, and no one else absorbing the financial risk with you, the old rules don't just feel outdated. Some of them are actively misleading. The first one is the 4% rule. If you've done any retirement research, you've seen this. The idea that you can withdraw 4% of your portfolio in your first year of retirement, adjust that amount for inflation each year after, and your money will last 30 years. It became the rule of thumb because it was simple, easy to calculate, easy to remember. I don't think the 4% rule is useless. I think it's a starting point. The problem is that it was built on historical market data that may or may not reflect what the next 30 years will look like. It doesn't fully account for your specific allocation, your health when you retire, or how long you might actually live. But here's my bigger concern, especially if you're living alone. When it's just you, there's no cushion, no partner's income to lean on in a bad year, and no second pension. If you've treated the 4% as gospel and the market drops 20% in year 2 of your retirement, you're making decisions under real pressure with no backup. What I do instead is something closer to a bucket approach. I keep 2 years of living expenses in a stable, liquid accounts. That's what lets me not panic sell when markets are bad. My long-term portfolio stays long-term, and I don't withdraw on a fixed schedule. I think about what I actually need. Some years that's more, and some years that's less. I'm not running my retirement like a vending machine where I press the same button every January. The 4% rule is a useful concept. The second shift is about what you're retiring to, not just from. My Retire ASAP video made the case for not waiting, for understanding the real cost of delaying retirement. But here's the part I didn't spend as much time on. When you retire, especially cold turkey, one day you're working and the next day you're not, there's a version of that transition that can feel like a free fall. Work, whether we loved it or not, was giving us things beyond a paycheck: structure, social contact, problems to solve, and a reason to get dressed, an identity. And when that disappears all at once, some people find themselves in a disorientation that they were not expecting. I didn't quit work and then sit still. I retired from full-time income, but I still have my Etsy shop where I sell my artwork on greetings cards, jigsaw puzzles, and write and illustrate children's books. I make videos for this channel. None of it is a second career and none of it is full-time. But it gives me creative engagement, small income streams that I genuinely enjoy, and the satisfaction of making things that go out into the world. That wasn't an accident. I moved towards something. When you're solo, your income security matters more, not less. When you're solo, your income security matters more than it does for someone in two-income households. A small income stream you enjoy is not just a nice extra. It could be the thing that gives you breathing room when the market is down, that lets you delay drawing on savings for another year. That makes the difference between feeling financially anxious and feeling genuinely stable. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be impressive. It just has to be something that you do anyway, that also happens to bring in a little money. The old model said, work hard, then stop completely, then live off what you've saved. That model assumed savings large enough to fund 30 years of zero income. The new model has more flexibility in it, more creativity. Retiring to something doesn't mean going back to work. It means knowing that what you're building when you step away from what you had. The third shift is about your portfolio. The 60-40 rule, 60% stock, 40% bonds, was the standard for a long time. Stocks for growth, bonds for stability. It made sense in the environment it was built for. The problem is that standard portfolio designs were built for standard situations, and a lot of us aren't in standard situations. If you're in your 50s, retiring earlier than the traditional age, potentially funding 35 or 40 years in retirement rather than 20, a rigid formula may not serve you the way it was supposed to. Inflation over that time horizon is real. Bond yields have not always kept pace, and if your allocation isn't matched to your actual time horizon and your actual risk tolerance, you can end up either too conservative too early, watching inflation eat your purchasing power, or too aggressive at the wrong moment. I'm not a financial advisor, and I'm not telling you what your allocation should be. What I'm saying is that your portfolio should be custom to your timeline, your expenses, and your other income sources, your risk tolerance, not an inherited rule that was written for someone else's life. For me, the clarity came from simplifying. I know my baseline. I know what I spend, and I know what I have in liquid accounts and what I have in long-term investments. That simplicity means I can actually see my financial picture clearly, which makes it easier to make calm decisions instead of reactive ones. Here's what surprised me most when I looked at my own setup. I hadn't broken the rules because I was being reckless. I broke them because the rules weren't written for someone like me. They were written for a specific kind of household, a specific kind of career trajectory, and a specific kind of life that a lot of us were never inside of. Thank you so much for watching.